I've always wanted to do that. Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Ken Weber, the CEO of Goodwill Industries of Greater Cleveland and East Central Ohio, and a proud City Club member. I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, the President and Chief Executive Officer of Goodwill of Northern New England, Eleanor Roosevelt. There are a few topics that resonate. Topics that resonate more with Americans during a presidential election year than job creation and growth. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reported an unemployment rate of 5% in December of 2015, the lowest in 7 years. Despite these strides, there is still much we can do as employers and as a nation to ensure that everyone who wants to work can work. Putting people to work is at the heart of the mission of Goodwill Industries International, founded in 1902 by a Boston Methodist minister, and he was a real social innovator, the Reverend Edgar Helms. Goodwill established a philosophy early on of a hand up, not a handout. More than 100 years later, Goodwill collectively is a $4 billion nonprofit organization with 165 independent member organizations that provide employment, training, and rehabilitation for people with barriers to employment, along with a host of other programs and services that meet individual community needs across North America. But despite Goodwill's success, there is still more to be done. Goodwill is committed to improving self-sufficiency for 20 million people and their families by 2020. It's in this context that Eleanor Roosevelt joins us today. Ms. Roosevelt's career has encompassed leadership positions in philanthropy, public policy, politics, the arts, and higher education. She began her career in Kentucky, where she joined the faculty of Western Kentucky University. There she taught museum studies and worked on the staff of the Kentucky Museum for almost 8 years. Starting in the late 1980s, she followed in President Franklin D. Roosevelt and First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, her grandparents' footsteps, and entered politics, working for the Democratic National Committee and in a variety of state and local campaigns in Chicago, including that of Senator Paul Simon and Mayor Richard Daley. She also served as director of the Chicago Mayor's Office of Program Development and as executive director of the Brain Research Foundation, an affiliate of the University of Chicago. But grassroots community work started calling to her, and in 2011, after spending a decade working for Boeing Corporation, she accepted the position of president and CEO of Goodwill of Northern New England. In her role at Goodwill, she oversees a staff of more than 2,000 employees serving Maine, New Hampshire, and northern Vermont. In a 2011 interview with the Portland Press Herald, Ms. Roosevelt explained her career change in this way. "My mother taught us we could become special by what we contributed to the community. It wasn't about having wealth. It was about having a meaningful life." Ladies and gentlemen, members and friends of the City Club of Cleveland, please join me in welcoming Eleanor Roosevelt.
Thank you.
Welcome.
That was very nice. Thank you, Ken. That was a long introduction, but it was really nice. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, Dan. And I understand that I do follow in the footsteps of some relatives who have spoken here before. And so I am happy to be carrying on a family tradition. I am honored to be here with you today. When I moved from Chicago to Maine 4 years ago, I told a friend that I was never going to wear anything but a plaid shirt anymore. But though I did bring my bean boots here, I did manage to find some of my old clothes from corporate life. Cleveland, Ohio, and Portland, Maine actually have something else in common that you may not know. We are both called the Forest City. Did you know that? And so in looking into that a little bit, I understand that the city of Cleveland has committed to a robust plan to restore the urban tree canopy in Cleveland. And I think that's really important because the environment that we live in not only helps the earth, the environment, but it helps the people who live there. So it brings people together. And I just applaud you for that bold move. Now, some of you, I hope a lot of you, saw the Ken Burns series on PBS last year. Anybody see that? 30 million people saw that, saw it. But what that means is that 30 million people, including you all, know a whole lot more about my history than I know about your individual histories. We're only being introduced today. And in some ways, that sort of incomplete knowledge, you know a little bit, but you don't know the whole story, is like many people's understanding of Goodwill Industries. It seems that everybody knows about Goodwill stores, but that's not all we are, right, Ken? That's right. You know a little bit about Goodwill because you are a generous donor, for which we are most thankful, and a shopper, perhaps. But I bet few of you know the whole story that Ken alluded to. So I want to tell you the story of Goodwill's founding. It was so meaningful for me when I heard it. In the late 1800s, Edgar Helms, a young Methodist minister serving in the settlement houses in South Boston, saw, as we now call them, new Americans who were living there but were lacking in basic essentials, in food, in clothing, in housing, in the very dignity of their lives. No one wanted to hire them, but Reverend Helms wanted to help. So he took his horse and buggy and some burlap bags, and he went up to Beacon Hill, and he asked the wealthy residents there to donate things that they didn't want or need anymore. And with those donations, he clothed those who were in need. But he saw that didn't solve the problem. People were still broke, they were still hungry, and they were still unemployed. They needed a way to provide for their families. They needed jobs, and those were scarce. So he invented a business, a social enterprise. Edgar Helms created Goodwill jobs out of those donated goods, collecting, sorting, repairing, and selling, creating jobs all along the way. And in turn, those jobs gave those individuals and families who had come to this country with such high hopes, yet who had been barely holding on. It gave them a real chance to build their new lives and to become active members in their new communities. Edgar Helms went on to establish child care programs for working women, a summer camp in Western Massachusetts, and even a water bottling enterprise. I wish we hadn't quit that quite as soon. He built enterprises that create jobs, that lead to stable lives, and it's been part of the Goodwill DNA since its earliest days. Edgar Helms understood that a job, having work, was the means to community engagement, and because we live in society, the means to dignity. Then and now, there is dignity in work, in all work. You know, lots of folks think that my worldview, the way I look at things, was shaped by my grandparents, and they were absolutely instrumental. But it really was Babar the Elephant King. As a kid, I read and reread those stories. I loved Babar. And I learned that in Celesteville, the city that he built for the elephants, everyone had a job. And every job was appreciated for what it contributed to the community. And that's what I wanted my world to be. Think about it. Every job was appreciated. The trash collectors, the doctors, the cooks, the custodians, the teachers, the salespeople, the companions, the lawyers, the mechanics, and so on. But today, in our reality, not everyone has a job, and not every job is truly valued for the contribution to community life that it is. Reports that I'm sure many of you read will tell us, and many of us as business leaders know, that there are jobs waiting to be filled in many sectors. We also know that there are people who want to work, many of whom need a second chance, or a third, or a fourth, or a seventh, another chance. So what's the problem with making this work together? As business leaders, you know that it's critical to have the right people in the right jobs at the right time so that your business can go where you want it to go, so it can attain your goals. But if we open our minds just a bit, we can open up those pathways for people who are often out of contention for even consideration, even though they may actually do a good job. For our communities to thrive, we all need to think seriously about how to include a diversity of talents in our workplace. How do we play our part in our community by thinking through the ways that we can create value from that diversity? How do we make that slight mental shift from being so narrowly focused on getting a particular job done in a particular way to being more broadly focused on getting the job done by hiring an individual we might otherwise overlook? That value shift has a broader impact. When a job gets done by someone you'd never considered as being able to do that job, it says a lot about you as an employer. It shows that you can do more great things in your business, for your business and for your community. We hear this over and over again. Success is more meaningful and more sustainable because you have strengthened in multiple ways the economy of your community. To have a thriving economy in which every person who wants to work can work, we each need to do our part. But we all reap the benefits. Think about how this shift in thinking can actually help each of you in the role that you play to achieve your established objectives. For us, in northern New England, where we have more trees than people, this is especially important. A skilled, supported workforce is key to our economic development. And just as Goodwill's founder, Edgar Helms, saw a need and developed a corresponding solution, we see the need to help people build stability in their lives through work. Every person in our communities, whether here in Cleveland or in Portland, no matter what brings them here, whether they are locals or from away, as Mainers put it, or from away. If they want to work and to build a stable life, they have talents that will make our workplaces and communities stronger and richer. Now, I'm not saying that that's an easy thing. Do you remember Paul Simon's lyrics in his song, Love and Hard Times? It's easy to be generous when you're on a roll. It's hard to be grateful when you're out of control. When life has been topsy-turvy for years and years, building stability takes practice. We at Goodwill believe that we can help people move through turbulence into stability by keeping and growing in a job. It may take longer than we expect or than we want, but to go from out of control to being in control takes practice. And it means a commitment to each other. We call it, in Northern New England, we call it job connection. Here, Ken calls it dream to achieve. It's an approach that sticks with folks who've had the most serious challenges in their lives so that we can address those challenges together. And I have to say, we are delighted by the response of business leaders who share our vision of sustainable communities, thriving communities, where all people are fully engaged and participating through education and employment. KeyBank has been our earliest and strongest supporter of our job connection approach. That tells us we're on the right path, and it inspires us. Now, at the start of this talk, I mentioned influences, and I'm going to tell you another story. I want to tell you a story about my younger daughter. About 20 years ago, she was a teenager, and we were in Warm Springs, Georgia, at the little chapel there on the campus of the Rehabilitation Institute that my grandfather founded. And we were commemorating the 50th anniversary of my grandfather's death. Now, my daughter and I, we didn't live in Georgia, so we had flown in for this, and we had missed the rehearsal. And we'd actually arrived in our pew in the back just as it was my daughter's turn to take part in the order of service. All the other participants who had processed and had gone up to the front, and they were seated behind the communion rail. But she bravely got up and started her lonely walk down that aisle. And luckily, the minister in charge, Dr. Forrest Church, anticipated what he called her potentially awkward leap and got up and opened the communion rail for her. So, phew, that was good. We got her inside. But once she was inside, she still didn't know where she was supposed to go. To the lectern, where the announcements are made, or to the pulpit, where the gospel is read. Being a Roosevelt, she chose the pulpit. And from there, she read from her great-grandfather's words from January 11th, 1944, as the war was winding down, as he was speaking to the American people about the world that we had paid for through this terrible war. It's a speech called The Economic Bill of Rights, and she read it clear and strong. I was so proud of her. And I want to read a little bit of it to you today. Every American is entitled to the right to a useful and remunerative job in the industries or shops or farms or mines of the nation. The right to earn enough to provide adequate food and clothing and recreation. The right of every farmer to raise and sell his products at a return that will give him and his family a decent living. The right of every businessman, large and small, to trade in an atmosphere of freedom from unfair competition and domination by monopolies at home or abroad. The right of every family to a decent home. The right to adequate medical care and the opportunity to achieve and enjoy good health. The right to adequate protection from the economic fears of old age, sickness, accident, and unemployment. The right to a good education. Yes, my grandparents influenced me, and probably you as well. It all fits. This speech ties together the elements of building stability for a person, for a community, for a nation. Maybe some of you, as I have been hearing about the what they call the new gig economy. From Forbes to Wired, NPR to the Wall Street Journal, from Fast Company to The Economist, stories of people piecing gigs together to make a living because it's more interesting. Those legends over in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, they put a lot of gigs together to get started and to keep going. And for many in northern New England, especially in our rural areas, piecing together a living gig by gig has been a way of life. Only they don't call it gigs. They call it poverty. So I have a concern about the gig economy if it grows into more of our working future. The conversation is interesting, but it's been an elite conversation. It's been about people who have the luxury to go from gig to gig. We have to bring the conversation together. From interesting generalities to a deeper understanding of what might separate us rather than bring us together. We have to think about everyone's dignity and everyone's ability to build stable lives, and the roles that each of us play in extending the conversation to include everyone who wants to work. The Economic Bill of Rights speaks to this. And there is much developing conversation about the implication of a dramatic alteration of the employer-employee relationship and its impact on our working future, our healthy working future. Actually, contemporary research in health also reinforces the thinking behind this description laid out in the Economic Bill of Rights. For decades, a couple of researchers, Robert Evans and Gregory Stoddart, have led research into the driving factors of a community's health. They mapped out 9 areas: social environment, physical environment, genetics, quality of health care, health and function, disease, behavior, well-being, and prosperity. Now, perhaps you're as relieved as I am that it's not all about our BMI, but that is important. That is important. But why this matters to us is that throughout the work that we are doing, we are seeing clearly how the social determinants of health drive how we help people build stability in their lives. At our Goodwill, we focus on three of them: access to education and training, safe housing, and employment and job satisfaction. These are critical factors that we can influence. We know how to do those things. But we work in partnership with other agencies, with other specialties that round out the picture of need and lead to shared success for our clients. I came to Goodwill of Northern New England because I felt like I really fit in there. What I saw in the work of Goodwill, besides it being a business, a thriving business that supports good, solid social work, is that it was a commitment to shared dignity, and that is deep inside me. It came from the organization's earliest days, that digging deep, getting your hands dirty kind of commitment to every person's right to personal stability and engagement in their community through work. That's what the Economic Bill of Rights says. Everyone deserves a job. A job is the way we build our community, and our communities build our nation. In order to live in a community, we all need a decent roof over our head, and we need food on the table. Personal stability and engagement in community, that's what makes our economy. Edgar Helms recognized it over a century ago. My grandfather spoke about it 70 years ago, and we see it today. Give someone a chance, and they can change their life. Beyond a chance, people need support. They need practice to keep life changed. And we can all help. Whether we are conscious of it or not, our own dignity is connected to everyone's dignity. Dignity is what our working future needs to be all about. Thank you, and I understand there will be some questions. Ken?
Have a seat. Today at the City Club, we are enjoying a Friday forum featuring Eleanor Roosevelt, President and Chief Executive Officer of Goodwill Industries of Northern New England. We encourage you to organize questions for our speaker now and remind you that your questions should be brief and to the point. If you are joining us via our radio broadcast or webcast and would like to tweet a question, please tweet it at the City Club. We welcome all of you here and those joining us via the radio broadcast and web stream provided by our primary media partner, 90.3 WCPN, WVIZ PBS, 104.9 WCLV Idea Stream, or one of the many radio stations across the region and the country that carry the City Club programs. Production, distribution, and broadcast of City Club programs are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. Be sure to join us Tuesday, January 26th, as we welcome Michael Bruin, Executive Director of the Sierra Club, for a conversation on climate change and how clean energy is boosting our economy and transforming our country. For more information about our upcoming and past forums, please visit us online at cityclub.org. Today's forum is part of our Diversity Thought Leadership Series, sponsored by a generous gift from KeyBank. We thank you all for your support. Our community partner for today's forum is Goodwill Industries of Greater Cleveland and East Central Ohio. Our hospitality partner is the Metropolitan at the 9 Hotel. We thank you for your support. Additionally, we welcome guests at the tables hosted by Friends of Patrick Sweeney and the Center for Community Solutions. We thank you all for your support. Lastly, we welcome students from Brecksville Broadview Heights High School. Student participation is made possible by the Mary Jane Spar and Charles E. Spar Charitable Trust. Will the students please stand and be recognized? Now it is time to return to our discussion and our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including our guest. Holding microphones today, our Director of Programming, Stephanie Jansky. Where are you, Steph? Oh, right in front of me. And Content Associate Teddy Eisenberg in the back. May we please begin the question and answer period?
Barbara.
Ms. Roosevelt, thank you for the just amazing contributions that you've made to the various communities that you've lived in. I appreciate your concept of a value shift, of allowing those who are in reentry mode, who have made some mistakes, to allow them back into the working world. I work for an executive search firm, and many of our clients talk about the difficulty of finding entry-level workers who have the requisite skills to take the jobs. So in consideration of the legacy of your founder, what kinds of training programs is Goodwill either providing or providing access to that provides training for positions in the larger working world?
I think common across all of the workforce programs that the various Goodwills across the country provide is that very basic learning how to work, learning what it means to have a work ethic, to know how to understand the work situation, what is required, and to fulfill that on a very simple and basic level. That often coincides well with the need that our clients may have to bring order to their own lives. And so those two kinds of counseling themes can work together well. For our employers, what helps them be confident that that worker is going to show up and exhibit the behaviors that are needed to even accept training. Most of our employers provide the specific training that the job needs. And what they find is that the entry-level worker just sort of doesn't know how to conduct themselves. And so we work in partnership with our clients, standing with them and behind them to help them to acquire those skills. We used to call them soft skills, but they're not so soft for people who've had chaos in their lives. It is tough business, but we're with them to help them acquire those skills and keep them in the face of temptation and challenge to fall back and to keep going in the right direction. So that's the role that we play. I'd also like to say, please feel free to ask any question, even what you think are personal ones. Believe me, I've had it before. So, yes, ma'am.
Hi. I was wondering, what has been the most rewarding experience in your life?
Oh my goodness. You know, I never stopped to think, well, that's the most rewarding thing, because it's like a cereal. I guess I can't even answer that question because I look at the parts of my life from my family, which is like any other American family or any global family, has ups and downs and ins and outs. But that's been a meaningful experience. My grandchildren are just fabulous. They're the light of my life. I learn new things from them all the time. Every job that I've had has been a wonderful learning, developing experience. So I guess just having that attitude, maybe that's the most important thing in my life, is feeling like everything is positive and useful and teaches me to be hopefully a better and more useful person. Everybody experiences that, right?
Yes. Has Goodwill done any particular outreach to immigrants?
You know, I'm not going to speak for Goodwill here. I'll let you ask Ken that question. But in northern New England, we do have an immigrant and refugee population. I don't know who ever suggested to someone from sub-Saharan Africa that they should come to Maine, but they're wonderful new Americans, and we do work with them in special programs that help them acquire language. And also the whole question of certification is a very difficult and important area in their lives, and we do our best to help them along that path as well. They bring enormous skills and talents to an area that needs workforce.
Great.
Yes,
Good
sir.
afternoon and welcome to Cleveland.
Thank you.
So this year obviously is a very important election year in 2016, and there's this national conversation about the role that the government, the nonprofit, and the private sectors play in affecting the lives of others and helping to bring about economic impact and improvement. And I kind of lament the tone that it's taken between people who feel differently about the issue. Given your experience and your perspective in a variety of sectors, what are some of the things that we can keep in mind as we listen to this conversation on the roles that each sector plays in helping to improve the lives of our community?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is of what upsets me about the conversation is the denigration of the role of government. And one of my favorite quotes of my grandfather's is when he said, "Never forget, government is ourselves and not an alien power over us." And so what we can do is remember that, and remember that we're responsible for government and get involved there, and that we're also responsible for the government that does get elected. We're responsible to work with that government. And the second thing that it brings to mind is just the example of my grandfather and my grandmother, who everybody thinks of them as people who put the government to work with a lot of programs, but there were always private sector partners and nonprofit partners. Both of them worked extensively with bringing those sectors together to accomplish the things that people need. And we just need to keep that in front of our minds and keep pushing for that, but never forgetting that we are connected to really all three of those sectors if we just step up and step in. Yep.
Dealing with people who have run afoul of the criminal justice system or have abused drugs is necessary, and it's very difficult. The old "an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure" comes to mind, which leads me to ask, what, if any, programs is Goodwill pursuing, perhaps in cooperation with inner city schools, to prevent those problems from arising?
I think a lot of our Goodwills do different things across the country. And so again, I refer you to Ken, and there are some other Goodwill CEOs from other Goodwills in Ohio here, and I refer you to them to see what they're doing. What we in Northern New England have done is primarily to work with incarcerated youth and with adults, knowing that there are a lot of our partners who work with children through the schools. And where we try to complement that work is to work with the adults who are their parents. Because if a child goes to school and learns something good, but they come home to chaos and danger, it's not as likely to be cemented and to succeed in that child. That is the same kind of dichotomy that our challenged adults find. Many of our clients they want to be good workers, but when they leave work, they go home to a domestic violence situation, or a child or a parent who is disabled and needing critical care, and they can't put it all together. So we step in and try to make that situation manageable by helping them to see what are the resources that they have, and we go with them to connect to those resources so that they can get order in their lives and make it all work. So in terms of stemming the problems at the root, while we in Northern New England don't have early childhood programs, we are strong supporters of early childhood education, being in children's lives from a preschool age to give them the best chance at life, because that's the only way that this cycle is going to be broken.
Good afternoon. Sorry, I'm not supposed to touch the microphone.
It's okay.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing the story of the start of Goodwill and its basis in social enterprise. I represent a nonprofit here towards employment, and we're about 3 weeks away from launching our own social enterprise to create jobs for our graduates. Could you talk a little bit about what it takes, the challenges and opportunities of employing those who are still en route to that stability while still needing to, hit and achieve a bottom line for business, since it's just such a part of what Goodwill has been done so successfully?
Well, it does take an internal commitment to support those employees and to bring them the resources that they need to overcome the challenges that they're going to find during their day or life outside of work. I mean, we all know, because we're all human beings, right? Nothing ever goes exactly right, and so we are all lucky that we have resources that we can go to. We have a family, or we have friends, or coworkers who are just there for us. But a lot of people don't feel that way. And so if you're going to employ people who have challenges, you need to help them find that resource. In here, they call it dream managers, which I love that term. We call it something else, but it doesn't matter. The point is that to help them be successful makes the whole business successful. And as in terms of shaping your business, you need to include it as part of your design, your business plan. Thanks for doing that.
So much appreciated what you've shared. Could you talk some more about the specifics of maybe an employer in Northern New England you've been able to shift and build their tolerance for employees that have barriers or might need more chances?
Yes. So we have, for instance, one of our business partners runs a highly specialized technology firm, and he has had trouble finding engineers. I don't know why people don't want to move to a place that has 8 months of winter, but he was having trouble finding that really high level of skill. And we had clients who had that high level of skill, but they had other challenges in their life. And so that employer agreed to partner with us, hired these engineers, and we were right there with them to help them with the challenges that they had in their life. And they have turned out to be stellar employees. They have gone on to be promoted. Those jobs have opened up, and we're now in the second and third generation of hires with that company. It isn't easy, and it isn't simple. And I have to say, it probably isn't cheap either. But if we want the long-term benefit, that long-term efficiency, it is much more economical to pay for it now up front, where we can help people become positive contributing members. And that has long-term benefit for all of us.
Ms. Roosevelt?
Yes, sir.
You've declared your openness to a personal question, so here's one. Your grandparents are associated with two famous visionary statements. One you've read from, the Economic Bill of Rights, which actually was new to me. And the other famously was your grandmother's Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Not that it was just hers, but
it was based on my grandfather's speech in 1941 called the Four Freedoms Speech.
Hear, hear. So it is kind of wonderful to see how fully you have inherited comfort in ranging from the ideal to the pragmatic in your work and in the words you've shared with us today. And my question is a very personal one. I read about your career a little bit, beginning in museum science, ending up at Boeing and community relations, and suddenly in Maine working with Goodwill. And I ask whether this pattern in your own life that brought you to the place that you occupy today, where your skill in ranging from the exalted to the prosaic is so clearly on display. How did this happen?
Well, I think you talked about my mother. Did you talk about my mother? Or did you talk about my mother? Dan, somebody talked about my mother. I had a wonderful mother who, cared that we sort of had our heads screwed on straight, and who also gave us a liberal education. I am a product of both Catholic and public schools, and a liberal arts. I was actually an art major, and that I think prepared me to look at life as not only with a sense of duty that I should be doing something that was helpful and useful, which then influenced my commitment to corporate citizenship, which starts with the commitment of a business to provide something that the world needs. Plus just an openness to learning and not feeling like I had to be an expert in order to go to work at it. And I've pretty much never been an expert at what I was hired to do. And so that's been a lifetime of fascination.
We have a question from Twitter. Scarlett Sharp would like to know, other than your grandfather, who was your favorite United States president and why?
The presidency is such a hard job. It is. I'm sure all of us would agree as we see the presidents. I would just go back to my grandfather and how he aged. Of course, he aged over 4 terms, but but all of they start out with a full head of hair and they end up with their snow white. And I would say President Obama, because we have stepped over a barrier that was there whether we wanted it to be or not. That is an important thing for our country, for our next generations, and for the future generations of children who are going to grow into their voting rights. So that's important to me.
Hello. Would you mind sharing an anecdote or maybe a personal experience that you have with your either your grandparents?
My grandfather died before I was born, so I don't have anything personal to say about, except as he comes to me, in a sort of memory, in a dream. But my grandmother, there were 25 grandchildren, and I am in the middle of those grandchildren. So I had older cousins who had the advantage of a lot more time with her than I did. So I was 13 when she died. What I remember about her and the time that I did get to spend with her, which of course she had to share with the dozen other cousins who were there. It was mostly in the summertime or when she would come to visit us in California. I remember her. She was a little deaf, and she would lean in and listen to me. And I was just a kid. I have no idea what I had to say to her, but I remember her listening to me. And I remember I was told that I asked if I could have a particular necklace that she had when she died. I was told I asked her that, but she but she I remember that listening, and you know, and I've never forgotten that. Listening is so important, and I think it's so hard. You know, when somebody's talking to us, we're thinking about what our reply is. We're not necessarily really listening. And she really listened. And she always would ask when we'd be at the table. So during the day, when I'd go to her house in the summer, and there'd be all these cousins, and we'd be running wild over the little beautiful piece of property she had there in Valkill. But we were expected to be clean and dressed for dinner. And so we were, and we'd be at the table with, you know, famous people and students she met on the train on the way up, and I mean, just all kinds of people. But she would turn to everyone to make sure that they were having a good time, that they were engaged in conversation. And she would ask those of us who were little, she would make a point to ask us what we thought about something. And sometimes that was kind of scary because sometimes I didn't think anything about it. But I remember how important it was that she listened to me. And that's been a lifelong goal, to be a good listener. Yes, ma'am. Okay.
We've heard a lot about how the economy has recovered or is recovering for the most part, but wages have not recovered. If we're onboarding people into the economy and giving them entry-level jobs, but the wage won't support them, where does that leave us? What are your thoughts about a living wage?
You know, our goal for our clients and our employees is to be able to live, to sustain life. There are lots of ways that people want to put that together. But I think we need to take a hard look at our wages and understand where our employees are coming from and help them to have the kind of family life that is healthy and important, not only to them, but to all our communities. So I don't think it's an easy question to solve, but in general, I support moving toward a wage that allows families to live a decent and productive life.
Ms. Roosevelt, this summer I had the great pleasure to visit Campobello Island in the Roosevelt National Park, which I would point out is jointly managed by the Canadian and U.S. governments.
Yes.
The only example, I believe, in the world of a joint national park
International
managed by
park, yes.
two countries. One of the things that impressed me very much there was a tea with Eleanor that the Interpretive Center does, and they were very, very good at making your grandmother come alive as a person. Were you ever experienced there? I don't know that there was a time that you as a child would have been there.
No, by the time I came along, my grandmother went occasionally, but not very often. And so a couple of my older cousins went before my grandfather died, but after he died, she didn't really go back much after that. But I do have an experience with Tea with Eleanor, which is if you ever can get to Maine, take that drive up to the beautiful area of Maine there and see Campobello. And what is so great about that Tea with Eleanor is that the local residents are employees of the National Park Service. And they came up with this idea, and they did their own research, and they wrote their own scripts. And the presentation is so personal and meaningful to these young women who live on this island, and whose prospects are kind of difficult. And they deliver it with such feeling. And I took my granddaughter, whose name is Eleanor, and she's 5. And the young woman was, telling the story of my grandmother, and I could just see my little granddaughter thinking, that's me they're talking about. That's Eleanor. So we'll have to sort that one out later. But it is a very interesting place to visit. It was remote. It is an island, and it was a place where the family was relaxed and just had great neighbors who were island folk, and they were able to be themselves. So it's a special place. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. Today at the City Club, we have been enjoying a Friday forum with Eleanor Roosevelt, President and Chief Executive Officer of Goodwill Industries of Northern New England. Thank you, Mrs. Roosevelt. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. The forum is now adjourned.